2016, Mythic Battles Pantheon launched on Kickstarter, a joint venture between Mythic Games and Monolith Games. Based on classical Greek mythology, core pledges shipped with over 80 models, and the game was bound to appeal to those who feel fondly about its source material. But over $6 million across 3 campaigns later, it is apparent that Mythic Battles has more under the hood than your average one-shot Kickstarter exclusive game. The launch of nameless Seraphim Gaming having focused heavily on this game, my love for Mythic Battles is not very well hidden. But in this review I will try and reflect honestly on why I feel this game is worth your time, as well as the things that have held it back from gaining wider acclaim. In recent years, plenty of board games have dipped their toes into the miniature hobbyist market by adding so-called luxury miniature pieces to their games. But Mythic Battles straddles the line between board game and miniature wargame better than most. I won't talk about the models too much in this review, as I've already covered a lot in painting videos, but it's worth saying that they are generally highly detailed compared to most board game pieces, with Monolith using a combination of plastics to ensure that weapons remain straight. Pre-built to have the convenience of a board game, they nevertheless represent a hobbying treasure chest for those interested and willing to spend their time painting them. Meanwhile, other game components are as robust and detailed as any game I have played, and the gorgeous artwork throughout the game fires the imagination and increases player immersion. The skirmish mode includes a list-building mechanic of sorts via the draft, where players select units from those available to assemble a unique combination of forces. This becomes a tactical mini-game, with players seeking to both acquire the support of key heroes and monsters, whilst also potentially blocking their opponent's ideal force by recruiting units first, starting with the deity that will lead the army. Each unit, whether monster, hero or troop, comes at a cost in points, and players will choose whether to invest in a small force of very powerful units or a more numerous force. Each player will typically control a single deity, but besides this and a few other minor restrictions, players have wide freedom to assemble the faction of their dreams. Want to run a monster-only force? Go for it. Have a secret love for Homer's Odyssey? Or why not build a force based on your favourite characters from that epic poem? Another consideration is the number of Art of War cards your choices will bring with them. A limited resource that can activate special powers, permit additional activations per turn, and generally increase your tactical options. Monsters may seem more impressive at first, but often have no access to Art of War cards that are readily contributed by heroes. With such a wide number of factors to consider, players will have a great time selecting the units they like the look of best in the first few games, but will find a wealth of tactical depth to explore once they start to gain experience. And all this before the first card of the game is even played. Mythic Battles does suffer a little from being a game that is more difficult to describe than it is to actually play. Its core rule set includes terrain effects, special rules for flyers, fire and aquatic creatures, restrictions on movement and line of sight. There's a set of core abilities called talents, possessed by many units in the game, that adds additional rules and various mechanics to deal with the core objective of enabling your deity to collect and absorb divine stones, one of 2 ways of winning the skirmish. Each unit typically has its own special rules, unique to that character or monster, called powers, and a unique sliding scale of statistic-based attributes that control its speed, range and effectiveness in combat, which gets progressively worse as units lose vitality from damage taken in combat. Except for troops, of course, which are different again. And listening to me talk about the rules, you may already wonder if this game is too complex for you, and this is probably deceptive, which is one reason why we published a gameplay video on the channel before publishing a review. One compensation for this relatively high complexity is the wide range of scenario game modes that are often simpler, have pre-chosen forces, or switch off some of the core mechanics whilst leaving others. Whilst I really have found Skirmish to be the best mode for teaching new players, scenarios like Hydra Hunt could be useful to teach a more limited rule set to players that have less gaming experience or in situations where less time is available. This is not to confuse scenarios, however, with some sort of training wheels. In fact, the story-driven scenario games and campaigns are often every bit as compelling as skirmish mode and add even more diversity to the game. It's hardly a new approach, but the fact that Mythic Battles has a clean and consistent set of core rules, further modified by the specific rules that scenarios and models add, is part of what makes such a vast game feasible for casual players to assimilate. I also feel strongly that its grounding in classical mythology allows new players to deploy their pre-existing knowledge of the various units in the game, even before they know the specific rules. Most people will anticipate that Zeus can throw lightning, that the Spartans will be formidable in combat, that the Medusa has the ability to turn units to stone. How these things will manifest during the game may be a mystery, but if the aesthetic of the game already appeals to you, then the roles of many of the game's key units can be guessed. Since its release, I've encouraged many of my non-gamer friends to try the game, and have to say it may be that rarest of things. A big, complicated tabletop game that casual or rookie players can still comprehend, enjoy, and desire to play again. How will you remember all these rules and interactions during your first game? The reality is, you don't need to. Maybe you'll inadvertently roll a dice or two less than you could have, or miss an opportunity to use a power, but the game will still function just fine, and any tactical errors made will just be one more reason to demand an immediate rematch at the end of the battle. Mythic Battles' complexity makes the game more compelling, rather than clogging up the wheels of the game to the point of it being unenjoyable. Every element is packed with choices. In most of the games of Mythic Battles I've played, it's only the very last turn where the outcome appears inevitable, and until then I've always felt that there was a way to turn things around. The dice mechanic is notable for this and worth looking at in more detail. The 6-sided dice that come with the game have a blank side and numbers up to 5. To damage your opponent, you must match or exceed their defense statistic. How do you do that for monsters with a defense of more than 5? Simple. 5s explode, able to be re-rolled with the second result being added to the first. But what if you don't roll any 5s? Well, you can sacrifice lower value dice, and each time you do, you can increase the value of another dice by 1. If you only need 6, perhaps you won't risk a re-roll and a potential blank result and achieve damage this way instead. Or perhaps you'll acquire as many 5s as possible in the hope of shaving multiple points of vitality off your opponent in a single attack. You can also reserve dice as future +1 modifiers for after you have rolled your 5s, in case you don't reach that all-important number. Will you choose to roll more 5s and potentially do more damage but risk rolling too low on all of them? Or will you roll fewer dice but hold more in reserve to ensure you do at least some damage? Oh, and by the way, blank results immediately end the potential of that dice and cannot be modified, but some characters have ways of altering blank results, or using them for talents such as Mighty Throw, which can push a unit into an adjacent area and force them to drop any divine stone they are carrying. And I can't tell you how many situations I've seen in this game where a player is attacked, not with the aim of doing damage, but in the hope that they will roll sufficient blanks to deny their opponent that vital last divine stone. In most situations, there are no wrong choices, no gotcha moments that spoil the game for less experienced players, just ooh, that was close moments that will draw you in to play again. Just once more, it's only 11 PM. There's a reason why I have played more games of Mythic Battles than of any game I have ever owned, and more promisingly against the widest range of opponents. But for all my love of this game, there are chinks in its enchanted armour. Like many games, some of the flaws are mere counterpoints to its strengths. The time taken to choose a game mode, complete the draft, and set up a game makes Mythic Battles better suited to longer gaming sessions, particularly as you will probably want to play more than once to justify the setup and backup time involved. Storage options definitely help this, but there's no getting away from the fact that this is a game of epic proportions. The terrain effects that greatly enhance the dynamism of the gameplay take time for new players to learn. Trees and pillars are represented by physical terrain pieces that aid recognition, but most types of terrain are identified only by symbol, and I've played many games where one or both players have forgotten to account for them. I likewise strongly disagree with Monolith's stance on rock terrain pieces, removed from subsequent releases of the game amid complaints of their usability, as it created a visible barrier to line of sight that greatly aided the teaching of this key mechanic to players less familiar with similar games. We've also already discussed the way dice create options in combat, but again I have found this to be an area of the game where the number of options challenges new players for the first few games until everything clicks into place. But perhaps the biggest flaw of the game is the result of its limited release as part of 3 Kickstarter campaigns. This comes down to Monolith's decision not to pursue a retail release for the game, as appeared to be the plan when the game was first funded. Monolith has since become known for Kickstarter exclusive games, no doubt having been burned by poor sales of the excellent but expensive Conan board game. However, in Mythic Battles it has a rule set that I genuinely believe would be a very attractive prospect for competitive and casual gamers alike if it were only available continuously. Instead, it has largely failed to gain any kind of competitive tournament scene, its player base limited to those who have managed to secure it through Kickstarter or obtain it, often at higher cost, via online auction sites. That said, the subsequent success of a reprint campaign and the campaign for Mythic Battles Ragnarok, a completely compatible second wave of the game focused on Norse mythology, speaks to the quality of the game and the commitment of those that have played it, and it is apparent that the game will persist. Part of the reason we have focused content on this game at the launch of this channel is in the knowledge that new players may be tempted to take advantage of the Ragnarok Pledge Manager to pick up the game in the mythology of their preference. In the longer term, I truly hope that Monolith, or a determined cohort of its players, take advantage of its compelling gameplay to increase the reach of a game that has much more than just compelling source material to recommend it. If you love the game as much as we do, please share your experiences in the comments and let others know why we are raving about this so much. And while you're at it, let us know what other games you would like to see featured on this channel. For the next few weeks, we have more Mythic Battles content coming, so if you've enjoyed our recent videos, do consider liking and subscribing so that we know you want to see more. Until then, work hard, play better, and take care out there.